What's going on, guys? It's Luke here of SimBoxx, and welcome to the Let's Talk Boxing podcast. I'm your host, as always, and I'm delighted to be joined on this week's podcast by a guest co-host, maybe even a permanent fixture moving forward, Mr. Ciaran of Southwest Boxing Media. Ciaran, it's been a long time, man. We've worked very close together with Southwest Boxing Media over the years. Delighted to have you on today, buddy.
Yeah, first of all, just want to say, Luke, thanks for obviously inviting me on, mate. It's a pleasure to jump on with you, and it's always good to catch up with you and speak boxing. I mean, we're both really, really big fans of the sport. Been following it for so many years, and we've had many conversations, and we've kept in touch, Luke, which is good. But yeah, it's been a while since we've had a good boxing chat, mate. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the highlights of the boxing media world, if you like, since I started SimBoxx was back during the pandemic when there was no live boxing on, and ourselves at SimBoxx and you and Scott at Southwest Boxing Media, we done the 5 versus 5. You know, we was the originators of this. Forget Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn. We done the 5 versus 5. We streamed it on Fight Night Champion on an old PlayStation 3. We done it over 5 nights. Of course, I'll give you your props. I'll give you your flowers while you're here. You guys were victorious, and me and you had to do some sort of rendition of Sweet Caroline, but really, really good times. And I thought it was a really impromptu moment and something we really took, the bull by the horns and made something really good of that. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I definitely think we were the wisdom behind the magic for Mr. Hearn and Mr. Frank Warren, without a doubt, Luke. They must have saw him, mate, and just thought, do you know what? Let's turn that into reality. Let's do it. I think that was the motive, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I remember correctly, there was some questionable results. I remember a Calzaghe Roy Jones fantasy fight being over in a couple of rounds, and I think at one point we had Manny Pacquiao knocking out Ray Leonard or something like. I can't really remember, but yeah, a lot of fun. But we're here today, Ciaran. As always, in the world of boxing, there's a lot going on, which is why I was eager to get the podcast back on the road starting this week. And we'll start in Birmingham. There's a lot of boxing news we will get into as we go throughout the pod. But in Birmingham, the Magnificent Seven card from Frank Warren and Queensbury Promotions. I think this is the third installment now. I was lucky enough to be at the first one, which was headlined by Nathan Heaney against Denzel Bentley when he beat Denzel Bentley in a big upset at the time. And I think in a day and age, Ciaran, where Saudi Arabia is playing such a prominent part in big fights in boxing, that it's important that we keep these big shows in Britain, that we're still catering to the domestic audience. Not to throw any shade at Saudi, they're doing fantastic things for the sport of boxing, but it's really important that we get these kind of shows on British soil with British title fights. I think there's two on the card, fantastic prospects, 50-50 fights, a really exciting card, and one that I'm delighted is on, as I say, British soil.
Yeah, I agree, mate. And I think what is important is, as you said, as grateful as we are that these Saudi shows are happening, because as boxing fans, we just want to see the best fights delivered. And to be fair, to Turkey Alashek and Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, they're delivering these big, big fights on these big shows, which we want to see. And we've been so frustrated for so long with so many not happening. But coming back to what you mentioned, Luke, I think we can't lose the reality of as well that these homegrown shows are vital for us as well. And they're really important because I think it gives chance to see, talent that maybe you wouldn't see, prospects coming through, gives them that opportunity, it gives them a platform to perform on, to build their name, and to work their way up. And I think, just talking about grassroots boxing as well, it gives us the opportunity as fans as well, I mean, it's great. You mentioned there, Luke, you went to the first show of this and, you're able to get yourself to them. You can get some work from it as well, and this is very much a hobby to us, Luke. I'm sure you would agree, something that we're passionate about and we enjoy doing. And it gives us that opportunity as well to be close. And there's nothing like seeing the action from ringside of being close up with the fighters. I'm sure you agree, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everything that you say there kind of encompasses what Nathan Heaney's about. He was in the main event. He drew with Brad Pauls last time out in a British title classic, British middleweight title, which is on the line, of course, again, this time around. And Nathan Heaney's 35 years of age, and he's at the tail end of his career. He's a domestic-based fighter. I don't think he's ever fought overseas. He's not fought for a world title, but he's got this incredible support. The Tom Jones ring walk, which is synonymous now with Nathan Heaney, with Delilah and his fans that are so passionate from the small hall and filling out, the Resorts World now in Birmingham, previously the Manchester Arena. These are the kind of guys that flourish in the domestic scene, and it's good to see that he's got the main event again his third main event in a row. Um, yeah, so I think we are grateful to everything that's going on in Saudi Arabia because it's fantasy boxing over there, but the real grit, the real, sawdust kind of spit and sawdust feel to British boxing is what we've got on Saturday night. Did you watch the first fight, Ciaran, first and foremost?
Yes, I did, mate. And what a fight it was. And I did watch it again recently as well. I watched it back. I think it was the third time I've watched it now. So, says it all about the fight it was, really, and the action that we saw unfold. I mean, I just want to touch upon what you mentioned about Nathan Heaney there. I mean, what a story, as you said. I was looking on his Instagram the other day, and he put up, I think it was about 3 days ago, that he said 8 years ago that he was like graduating from, I think he was from university, and he was just about to, take on a career as a teacher. And he said he basically hung the gloves up. It was his amateur career he was in at the time, and he thought, right, I'm walking away from boxing now, obviously to focus on his teaching career. And just look how things have changed. I mean, 8 years later, look where he is now. I mean, that win against Denzel Bentley, as you said, I think most had him as an underdog, unless you were from Stoke or you were somebody really close to Nathan Heaney. I think, you would have said that he was an underdog in that fight. And just what a performance! It was superb. And yeah, coming back to what you asked, Luke. Obviously, we went into this fight then with Brad Pauls, and it was action from the get go. It was just a great fight. It was a bit of a classic case of to and fro, back and forth. What we like to see, edge of the seat type boxing. And yeah, it was just fantastic. I mean, do you think, Luke, looking at that fight now and coming on to talking about the rematch, do you think coming off that big win, I think undoubtedly Nathan Heaney's best win of his career against Denzel Bentley. Do you think going from the heights of that to coming back down, do you think maybe there was a little bit of underestimating Brad Pauls, or do you think he was still a bit dizzy from the heights of what he had experienced in the fight before? How do you see him, Ed?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think he 34 he would have been when he fought Denzel Bentley. He's turned 35 now. He constantly had that underdog mentality. He went into the Denzel Bentley fight as the underdog. There was a quick turnaround. Let's not forget the fight with Denzel was in November. The first fight with
Mm.
Brad Pauls was in March. Another rematch with Brad Pauls is in July. So, if you're looking at it, it's like 3 fights in 9 months, which is an incredible turnaround. And maybe the fact that Nathan beat Denzel Bentley, went into the Brad Paul's fight for the first time as like British champion and being like, I'm gone from the hunted to the hunted. He
Mm.
possibly did overlook Brad Paul's, which, let's not get it wrong with Brad Paul's. He had just one loss on his record going into that fight, but he was stepping up for the first time as well. So yeah, I think it could have been a conjunction of a few different things, which if we're being truthfully honest with ourselves, Ciaran, will make for a better fight come Saturday night because we always say with rematches sometimes that you don't really need to see them again. Liam Smith with Chris Eubank Jr., for instance, there was no appetite for that rematch. When it's a
Mm.
conclusive winner, this is a rightful rematch, and I'm glad the British title's still on the line. And this is a fight that both guys deserve, and both guys will rightly go in there thinking that they're going to win.
And like you said, I think a good point you made there, Luke, is we're talking about this. This is a British title fight, and me and you had a brief chat, Luke, before we jumped on and started recording about British title fights, and there's just something special about them. There really is. I mean, we all love seeing world title fights and watching the elite talents from around the world going toe to toe. We love watching this, and we have for years and years. But there's just something special about a British title fight, and they always seem to deliver. It never seems to be a British title fight, or there's very few, I would say, that you can pinpoint and you can think, do you know what? I didn't really enjoy that, or that wasn't for me, or that wasn't all action, that wasn't a thriller. 9 times out of 10, we watch a British title fight and we're saying, do you know, I won't mind seeing that again. I won't mind running that back. That's just a credit to obviously to the talent we've got in Britain as boxers, but they just always deliver, Luke, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that seems to be so unique to British boxing. You don't really have like an American heavyweight champion or a French heavyweight champion that's held in the same regard as these British titles. It seems that, you have all these WBA international or WBC silver titles that float around internationally. But in terms of our domestic title, our British title throughout the weights, it just seems to carry so much prestige and so much honor for these fighters that when they get in, there's some fighters that will pick a British title win over a world title win, which seems crazy, but it's true, isn't it? You know, many a fighter that I've spoke to that have said that, and it's something that we don't overlook as British boxing fans. You know, we truly appreciate how good British title fights are and how often they do deliver. But yeah, I think it's so amazing that it's so unique, seemingly to British title or British fighters. Sorry, that the British title is held in such high regard. It's not something that's replicated that I can think off the top of my head, Ciaran, around the world. It's not. I can't think of another, you know, country where I'm like, oh, their domestic title is such a prestigious honor to win.
Yeah, I agree fully, mate. I agree. And just coming back to Nathan Heaney, Luke, you mentioned obviously Nathan there, and we talked about his background, his story, which is incredible. But you mentioned as well a little bit about the following. We got to talk about it. I mean, we watched Johnny Fisher out last week against Alan Babic, another man who's just an outstanding ticket seller. He's a promoter's dream, really, in terms of ticket sales and the revenue he'll bring from that. But Nathan Heaney as well. I mean, it's just special, isn't it? I mean, he's determined. He's still craving. He's still got a hunger for this night at the Stoke City Stadium, and that's what he wants, and that's his dream. And I'm sure he'll have that in the back of his mind. And that's another thing, maybe, Luke, that was playing his factor, in that last fight against Brad Pauls, because let's not forget that coming off that win against Denzel Bentley, where people were talking then and saying, well, do you know what, if he's beaten Denzel Bentley here, he should be in this fight, he should be in that fight. And he was saying how close he was then. People were saying, well, he's got to be very close now to having this show in the Stoke City Stadium. So that's another factor that could have been in the back of his mind. But just the following, Luke, he's got, and the support is just tremendous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's something that he truly appreciates as well. He hand delivers so many of his tickets. I've spoke to him previously and listened to Frank Warren talk about it and other members of the Queensbury team, where they say, this guy will hand deliver tickets if need be, which is British champion. And the following that, he's got to be so easy for him just to be like, I'll employ somebody else. They can do that for me. I'm going to focus on the boxing. But he doesn't take his eye off the ball and start to devalue what these fans have done for him, because, like you say, he's got an incredible following. I think something you touched on there, which is interesting, is had Denzel Bentley beaten Nathan Heaney back in November, would Denzel Bentley's next fight have been a world title fight? And therefore, is that what Nathan Heaney was expecting? Because he's a massive ticket seller. He's not the youngest fighter. They might have capitalized on his biggest win and give him a world title next, rather than him dropping or staying at British level, sorry. And maybe that played an ulterior factor that you don't really see. It doesn't meet the eye. You don't think of it until a performance like that goes in, where it was 50-50. It did finish a draw. That, he might have been thinking, well, Denzel was getting a world title fight after this. Why have I not got the world title fight? And now he's found himself not as a setback because he's kept hold of the title, but he's now taking on a rematch that he originally wouldn't have thought about, and he probably wasn't even thinking about. I guarantee you, the morning after the Denzel Bentley fight, Brad Pauls wasn't the name on the lip of Nathan Heaney when he was talking about his next fight. He would have been thinking about.
Yeah, let's not forget, Luke. Sorry to jump in there, mate, but let's not forget. I mean, Denzel Bentley just before, not so long ago, he was fighting Janabek, and he was giving a decent account of himself. He give himself, a very good account of himself. Or obviously, he was fighting, I think somebody who is an elite type level fighter, and come up short against him. But no shame, because he gave a very, very good account of himself. So I think the point you made is a good one, Luke, that maybe this was in the back of Nathan Heaney's mind. I've just gone and beaten this man. And not so long ago, he was fighting Janabek, a man who was very much sort of becoming a bit quite feared in the division, I would say.
Yeah, and with the middleweight division, with Janabek is a great fighter. He's somewhat underwhelming in the matchmaking, maybe, that he's not taking on the very best fighters. He was due to defend his WBO middleweight title this past weekend and was pulled out a couple of days before due to dehydration. So we're not too sure how long he might stick around at 164. And just touching on the middleweight division in general, it doesn't seem to be like there's a plethora of talent there. In the days of Canelo or Golovkin, those kind of fighters that stuck around at middleweight. Nowadays, you've got Carlos Adamez. I'm not disrespecting any of these fighters, but they're not the pay-per-view stars, the mega stars of years gone by. So somebody like a Denzel Bentley, someone like a Nathan Heaney, someone like a Brad Pauls, if he gets the win on Saturday, can very rightly see themselves in that middleweight title picture. Obviously, fighters that we're going to speak on later on, Hamza Shiraz, Chris Eubank Jr., those guys, Tyler Denny, another Cinderella story, similar to Nathan Heaney. They're all, like I said, I'd probably put Jan Beck at number one, but the rest of those guys that I've just named there would rightfully believe that they have the very best chance of winning a world title. Brad Pauls, Nathan Heaney, Denzel Bentley, Hamza Shiraz. I think it could be an exciting division, but the kind of division where it needs a spark and it needs to burst into life, and maybe it starts on Saturday night for the winner. But yeah, I think there's definitely scope for some British middleweight champions in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I agree, mate. That's a good point you've made there. I mean, how do you see the rematch going, Luke? Do you think we're very much going to see the best version of Nathan Heaney again, or do you think maybe we're not giving Brad Pauls enough credit? Maybe we should be talking a little bit more about Brad Pauls, and maybe it wasn't so much about Nathan Heaney's sort of underwhelming performance. I wouldn't say underwhelming because it was a great fight, but not delivering to the levels that he delivered against Bentley, shall we say. Do you think maybe we should be saying a little bit more about Brad Pauls? How do you see it going on the weekend, Luke? What's your thoughts?
I think we could sit until midnight and talk about different outcomes of this fight, and we wouldn't necessarily be wrong. I think you could look at it from Brad Paul's angle and be like, I'm younger, I'm fresher, I'm coming into my prime. And then you could be like, well, Nathan Heaney now, 34, 35, did he peak with a Denzel Bentley win? Or then you could look at it from Nathan Heaney's point of, I'm established at this level. I had a slightly off night, got the draw. On another night, it could have gone my way, and I would have got the victory. So yeah, there's certainly arguments to be made for both men. I think if I was to wager on this fight, I think the certainty is it goes 12 rounds again. It's another fight that'll be super close. But I'm going to stick with Nathan Heaney. I think he gets this done on the cards, and I wouldn't be surprised, as I previously mentioned, with other predictions, that if it went to like a majority decision, split decision kind of fight, because I do think they're so evenly matched that it could go down to the wire again. But yeah, if it, I don't like sitting on the fence. I'll always try and make a prediction where I can, and Nathan Heaney on points. Yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I agree, mate. Without, obviously just I hate doing that. We do it with Scott as well. I know when you've given your prediction, I hate to be the one then to just jump in and go, yeah, I agree, because it does look a bit like I am just sitting with what you've said then. But no, in all honesty, I think we will see. I think we'll see a very, very good performance. I think it'll be a good fight, but I think Heaney will be better this time around. I think he will be. I think it'll be more conclusive. I think he'll be unanimous. I do think it'll be unanimous. And this is not me underplaying, anything that Brad Pauls did. This is not me, as we mentioned in the last few minutes, saying that it was just an off night for Nathan Heaney. I fully respect Brad Pauls. I think it was an outstanding performance, and he played his part in that first fight as much as what Nathan Heaney did and made it what it was. But I do think that this time we'll see a very switched on and focused Nathan Heaney, and I'm going to pick him to win unanimously on the cards.
Good call, good call. So if we're looking through the card on Saturday, we'll just pick out some of our standout fights or fighters. Before we get into that, Ciaran, it was a bit of a disappointment to see a couple of fights fall off this card in Liam Davis against Shabazz Massoud and Sol Dakers against David Adelaide. Although Sol Dakers is still on the card, he's rematching Mark Webster for the English heavyweight title. But those two fights, I thought, again, were two British 50-50 fights, all British domestic dust-up. So yeah, it was a shame to lose those two fights. But in terms of what's left on the card, is there anyone that stands out to you?
Yeah, just quickly, Luke, just want to mention that heavyweight fight you were talking about there, obviously between Saul Dakers and David Adelaide. I mean, that was one that it was an interesting fight. It was an intriguing fight because we're talking about this crop now of sort of, British heavyweights that we've got, and how far can they go? Where can they go to in the heavyweight division? I mean, we've obviously shown not so long ago an absolute classic, a British title fight between Fraser Clark and Fabio Wardley. I mean, what a cracker that was. And we've got a crop now of British heavyweights where, as I said, we're talking about them and we want to see what they can do. We want to see, can they go to that next level? Can they take themselves to be in the mix with these top heavyweights that we've got? And I think it would have been a bit of a sort of an eliminator in that conversation, if that makes sense, because we're talking about David Adelaide. Obviously, we saw he came up short against Fabio Wardley, but Fabio Wardley looks like he's going on to big things. He really does. He's been impressive. So no shame there. And I like Adelaide. Everything I've seen of him, I like. and then obviously Saul Canelo, you know, that it would have been interesting to see. I don't know if you agree, Luke, just to gauge perhaps more where Saul is as well in this fight. Given, you know, if he had gone in and beaten David Adele, then, you know, he'd be saying, well, hang on now, this is a man, or you just lost to Fabio Wardley. He's right in the mix of things. And I think he'd be knocking on the door as well. I don't know if you agree with that, Luke.
Yeah, definitely. And with you mentioned earlier, Johnny Fisher that's burst onto the scene now. I think sometimes, not intentionally, but boxing in general could have been quite disrespectful to Johnny Fisher in terms of, is he just a novelty act? We see, you know, that he's got tremendous support, that he doesn't really have an amateur background. He's a fantastic physical specimen. He's in great shape and he's got a lot of power. But there was always a thought there of, you know, is he just a ticket seller with his dad who, you know, he splits opinion online, but I think he's a great guy. He's, you know, he sells all the tickets for his son. He'd sell out the house. Very similar to Nathan Heaney. It's very personable. Johnny Fisher's exposed me
And
onto the
turns
scene.
up, Luke, just saying, and turns up the stag doos as well. Don't know if you saw that online. Turns
Yeah,
up
yeah,
the
yeah,
stag
yeah.
doos. Do you see that?
Brings the Chinese and everything. So yeah, you know, there was the thought there. You know, that's the point that I was getting to. That maybe, you know, without sounding disrespectful, that maybe was he, you know, not a novelty act because that is disrespectful. But you get the point I'm saying. Was he just a ticket seller? But he's burst onto the scene now. I think for Sol Dakers that he's rematching Mark Webster. That was on the original Magnificent Seven card in Manchester. That was a closely contested fight. So to take that on short notice, I think is a big call from Sol Dakers.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely that crop there, and I'm in agreement with you that you want to see these guys, you know, fight each other, and the losers can fight and rebuild, and the winners go on to British title level. So there's definitely an exciting crop there. One fight that I do want to pick out amongst a couple that we will talk about is Chantel Cameron making her Queensbury debut. Really surprised when she left Matchroom. I think it's fair to say, given that the trilogy with Katie Taylor looked such a natural fight to be made. The first fight went to Chantel Cameron, undisputed super lightweight champion. She lost the rematch, and now she is with Queensbury. You know, I think there was financial arguments, maybe that the purses wasn't right. So she's left Matchroom. She's left Jamie Moore. She's with Grant Smith at the Steel City Gym, which is a great setup with Dalton Smith and Sonny Edwards amongst some other great fighters. And I think, you know, when Chantel Cameron links up with Queensbury, maybe now it's not as obvious, it's not as glaring when the people are moving promotions because Matchroom and Queensbury and Wasserman and even Boxer are getting involved now, where these fighters are fighting on the Riyadh season card. So it's not you're not nailing your colours to a mast anymore, are you? Really, you're not shutting the door on opportunities with the promoters because these fighters are getting fights with each other across promotions because of the money involved. Let's not get it twisted. But yeah, I was surprised that she went with Queensbury because the opportunities weren't glaring. You know, you look at the Matchroom stable with Sandy Ryan and Rhiannon Dixon and Terry Harper, and these girls are floating up and down the weights to get different opportunities. It looked like Chantel Cameron was, you know, on the verge of whatever weight she wanted. She could challenge for a world title in Matchroom, and to go to Queensbury was a bit of a bolt from the blue. That's what I thought. I don't know if you agree, Ciaran.
Yeah, it did surprise me, mate. Dan, to be honest, it still does a little bit. I know what we saw in the 5v5s, and you know, Mr. Frank Warren and Ciaran and the team will be coming out now and saying that he's the best promoter in the land and what have you. But I've got to be honest with my opinion on it is still on the global front and on the global stage. Eddie Hearn and Matchroom is still very much where it's at. For me personally, my opinion. I'm talking globally. I know you could argue. I think Frank Warren's a great promoter. You can't argue against his Hall of Fame promoter. You look at what he's done over the years, you know, the list that we could name and reel off here and what he's achieved with these fighters and what he's given these fighters. And the fights that he's given us as fans, you can't argue with. But I just look at it and I just think, yeah, I get what you're saying about obviously, I think there was a bit of a dispute about money and what have you. And I mean, this can happen in this day and age, particularly in a sport now where so much money is being thrown about. And there are so many opportunities to go out and earn loads and loads of money. But I mean, it just seems like a complete change as well. You obviously mentioned with the change of trainer as well, you know, that she worked with Jamie. How long was she with Jamie for, Luke? She was with him a few years.
Yeah, a good couple of years. Took her to unified and then undisputed world champion. So yeah, there was certainly a few years there.
Yeah, you know, so that it's like a complete new slate, if you like, you know, a new start, a new change. And maybe some, you know, were we to argue, and maybe Chantel just felt she needed that I mean, she's hit the highest of heights in the sport. Nobody can argue with that. She's achieved everything she wanted and more, I would imagine she would say. So maybe it's just a case of, sometimes you need a fresh start. You need new ideas. You need new voices. And you need new working relationships. Maybe it's a little bit of that. I mean, I suppose only Chantel knows why the changes happened. But yeah, going back to what you asked me, it was and still is a bit of a surprise because I do believe that on the global stage, and if she's still got ambitions to do things globally, which I'm sure she has, because she's a fantastic fighter, I think that Mr. Eddie Hearn is still very much the man on that front to have in your corner.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one thought that's popped into my mind now. Like we say, these promoters are working together. And just before I get into that, I'll backtrack a little bit. I didn't want it to come across as like a criticism of Chantel that she's linked up with a new trainer, because Grant Smith's a great trainer, Jamie Moore's a great trainer. Like I
Yeah, I
say,
agree.
it's more the surprise aspect. But what if we are getting into the later part of 2024? Chantel Cameron picks up a win on Saturday, interim super middleweight champion, interim super lightweight champion, sorry. And if we get down to, I'm saying that, no, it's not going to be right. I was thinking if we get into another 5 versus 5, which they've been talking about, how would that have been for a trilogy fight on a Matchroom versus Queensbury against Katie Taylor for the trilogy? But if I'm right in thinking, Katie Taylor's scheduled to fight Amanda Serrano, isn't she, on the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson circus?
That's right, mate.
Yeah, so that squashes that a little bit. I was getting a bit carried away there, a bit excited. But just to finish on the Chantal Cameron segment, is that she's a fantastic fighter, very, very entertaining. She beat Katie Taylor, the first woman to do that as a pro. And for me, she was a more convincing winner in the first fight than the scorecards reflected. I thought Chantal Cameron was dominant.
I thought she was outstanding, mate. Just to jump in, I thought she was absolutely outstanding. I mean, you look at what Katie Taylor is, and we could go into and we could talk forever about what she's done for women's boxing and how she's made it, and what have you. But I just thought Chantel in that fight was absolutely superb. It seemed like without using puns, no pun intended, it was just a punch perfect performance. It really was.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on, because I think Chantel Cameron will get the victory this Saturday. No disrespect to LM McCallid, our opponent, don't want to overlook her, but I see Chantel Cameron as a huge favourite. This is the interim WBC Super Lightweight Champion title on the line. Sorry, so that will give her mandatory status, you'd imagine, for Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano winner. But I think as time goes on, I think it favours Chantel Cameron. Katie Taylor with 35, 36. As time goes
Mm.
on, she's not going to be able to keep going back to the well and digging out these world-class gritty performances that she's been doing, where she's been getting over the line with, like, Natasha Jonas, Amanda Serrano the first time around, Chantel Cameron in the rematch. Katie Taylor's a great fighter, and she'll go down as arguably the greatest female fighter of all time, certainly in my opinion. But I just wonder if, as time goes by, that it's going to favour Chantel Cameron.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I see your point there. Look, it is a good point. As you said, I think, not being disrespectful because I don't like to be, she is going to come through, I think, on the weekend and come through pretty well. Luke, and as you said, the expectancy, or I suppose the hopes then of us as boxing fans, especially in a time, as we said at the start of the podcast, where we're seeing the big fights happening now, we're seeing the fights that we want to see happening as fans, would be then that she would fight that Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano winner, whoever it may be. And as you said, you've got to look at the bigger picture then. I mean, if Katie beats Amanda and comes through, you've got to have, I think, Chantel, given what we saw as well, especially in that first fight, you've got to have Chantel as a big, big favourite. I mean, even with the changes she's made now in terms of her business, obviously with the new promoter and obviously changing the gym as well and trainers, you'd still, I think, then would have to look at it, given what you said about Katie's age and where she's at now, and some of the tough fights that she's come through. You would have to hold Chantel as a big, big favourite. So there's certainly now many opportunities that will arise, I'm sure, and now it's down to Mr. Frank Warren to deliver these opportunities.
Just a couple of other things on the Magnificent Seven card that I wanted to touch on, Ciaran, because I know you're very fond of Andrew Kane, so we'll get into his British title fight with Ashley Lane. Zach Parker taking on Jack Arnfield. Zach Parker for a long time seemed to be on a course to a world title fight, and then it was derailed when he was injured and ultimately lost to John Ryder. He takes on a returning Jack Arnfield, who has had one fight in the past 6 years. There's an interview available on the SimBoxx YouTube channel, so if our listeners, our viewers want to check that out, it's an interesting listen with Jack Arnfield. He's jumped right back into the deep end against that Parker, so we look forward to that fight. Yeah, Ciaran, I'm going to pass over to you, mate. Tell us about Andrew Kane and what kind of fight and what kind of fighter he is as he heads into a British title fight with Ashley Lane on Saturday night.
Do you know what? I really like Andrew Kane, and this isn't my Liverpool Scouts bias. It's nothing to do with that, Luke. But no, honestly, I just think, I mean, the gym, he's obviously from the Everton Red Triangle gym in Liverpool. I mean, what a talented gym. I mean, if you know your boxing, you like your boxing, you'll know about that gym and you'll know everything about the fighters that's in there and the goings on there, because there is some special talents coming out of that gym. I mean, we've looked at the likes of Nick Ball coming from Liverpool. I mean, probably my favourite fighter at the moment, I would say. Just love Nick Ball. And there is so much talent thriving and coming through there. And Andrew Kane is one of them. I mean, I know obviously he had that loss to Baluta. I mean,
no shame in that
happened.
Yeah, no shame in losing to Baluta.
Exactly, mate. Exactly. I mean, just look at Baluta. Baluta went on. Didn't he beat Dennis McCann then, or
was it a draw in the end?
Split draw.
Yeah, split draw in the rematch in the following weekend, aren't they? Yeah.
That's right, yeah, split draw, you know. So, I mean, everybody's raving and talking about Dennis McCann and what he could be. So, yeah, no shame in it at all, mate. And I just really like Andrew Kane. He's a very, very big puncher. I mean, his record says that. I think it's 11 wins, 10 knockouts on the record. So we know he can punch. But I think he's a super talent, and I'm really intrigued. He's one of them, as I said, this gym in general, and I've mentioned Nick Ball. I just think we need to follow their journeys, because there could be something special brewing from one of these fighters that we're talking about from that gym.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting angles of this is that Andrew Kane is the challenger, but he goes in a heavy favourite. But in Ashley Lane, I think this is a guy, he's got a record of 18 wins, 10 losses. He's got a few draws on there as well. So for him to win the British title in his last fight, you know, we build up the British title and what it means to our domestic scene previously in this pod. But Ashley Lane's a real success story in that he beat Chris Bork in his last fight and stopped him. I do make Kane a big favourite in this fight, but Ashley Lane is such a success story, and it's everything that's romantic about British boxing. When we get it right, we get it right. And Ashley Lane's a true success story. With Saturday, there's obviously other fighters on there: Ezra Taylor, Owen Cooper against Echo Isuman, great fight, 50-50 fight, and other good fights on there. We look forward to that. Ciaran, just before we close out, one thing that we couldn't not mention on the podcast, given that we're building up the middleweight scene so much, is Canelo going to fight Chris Eubank Jr. next?
Well, the rumours are saying possibly. I mean, I think he's in. It seemed to be between him and Berlanga, from what I'm seeing, from what I'm reading. I don't know if it's the same what you were seeing, Luke. That seems to look the way that it's going to be. I mean, does Chris Eubank Jr. deserve this fight? He's had opportunities in the past. I mean, we all know what happened with the Golovkin fight, the pens going missing and what have you. I mean, he is still a name. He's always going to be a name. He's always going to be... People are always going to watch him. People are always going to tune in. He's that typical love and hate character, I think, more towards the hate side, or people tend to dislike him. He rubs people up the wrong way. But he'll forever put himself in these opportunities, and I think Canelo will obviously be looking at Canelo. I mean, we're expecting now that it looks like that, providing obviously Crawford comes through against Madronov, it looks like the Canelo Crawford is likely to happen. I think that's the one, a big fight that Turki Alashek wants to make. So it makes sense for Canelo. It does. It's a credible name. It's a good name, we shall say. So it makes sense for Canelo to take it. I think he looks the front runner at the moment, Luke. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, certainly. And, you know, we mentioned about it being British middleweight and Chris Eubank being a middleweight. Of course, this fight would be for the undisputed super middleweight titles. And one thing I was always against saying was that Canelo is ducking anybody because of the resume that he's got, the people that he's fought, and at the times that he's fought them. You know, he had an incredible run of beating Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, amongst others, to become undisputed. But there is that feeling now, Ciaran, and we've only got a couple of minutes left on the pod, but there is that feeling that he's at this stage of his career, he's choosing to avoid David Benavidez. And I never thought I'd see the day where I thought Canelo is ducking Benavidez. Ducking's a strong word, maybe avoiding, I'll go with, to be polite to him. He's given us so many great fights. But I said on my Twitter feed that I've always wanted to see this fight with Chris Eubank. I think Chris Eubank, what he lacks in boxing ability, he makes up for in toughness, in work rate, in output, and in sheer arrogance that he'll believe he'll get in there. And I think he'll have more self belief than maybe Callum Smith or Caleb Plant. Not to take away from those guys, that he can go in there and win. And I don't think Chris Eubank's as good as Callum Smith or Billy Joe Saunders or Caleb Plant naturally as a boxer, but I just think that there's something about him that he'll go in there with unadulterated belief in himself, and maybe that'll be his undoing, and he'll get spectacularly knocked out. But we wait to see how that plays out. But yeah, I put him slightly ahead of Edgar Berlanga in terms of who will get the fight next.
Yeah, I just quickly want to say, look, I know we run out of time. I think I think Eubank's last performance against Smith was obviously the best we've seen from him. I think that's fair to say. It was a very good performance. I don't think Smith was 100%. I think things went all there, but nothing taken away from Chris Eubank's performance. I think a good link up with Bomac. I think that might be a good working relationship moving forward. Seems to listen a bit more to him than what he has perhaps previous trainers. But I do think that Canelo, if this fight happens, I think Canelo wins and wins quite well. I got to be honest. I do. I think it'd just be too much. I think it'd just be too much for Chris Eubank. I don't discount his heart and his belief that he'll have going into it, but I make Canelo a big favourite if it happens, Luke.
Yeah, of course. We look forward to an official announcement if any comes. Guys, we've reached the end of the podcast. I'd just like to thank you for watching, for listening. Leave us a review on whatever platform you choose to consume the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. Check out both Southwest Boxing Media and SimBoxx across all social media platforms. Ciaran, thanks for being on the podcast, and I look forward to catching up with you next week.
Been a pleasure, mate. Look forward to the next one. Cheers, Luke.